Hi everybody, I thought I'd do a little video with the stitching of the mask so that if there were any things that were a little bit difficult to understand from the instructions, it might be a bit more clear with the video. First of all, I want to let you know that I'm stitching with two different color threads, green in the bobbin and blue on top, just for the purposes of showing you a little more clearly what it is we want in seam allowances. So I want to mention that we'd like you to reverse stitch at the beginning and ending of each one of your sewing seam allowances, because we've had some that have come in without reverse stitching and the masks are coming apart. So we're going to reverse stitch here and 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm snipping my threads as we go. That's one set. And here's the other two pieces. So now we've got our two sections right here. And what I want to explain to you is about the tipping the seam allowances. We want to not have all the bulk of the seam allowances going in the same direction. So what I want you to do is put your two layers together like this, and when we get down here we're going to tip one seam allowance this way and one this way, and we need to check at the bottom down here to make sure we've put them in the same direction. Reverse stitching at the beginning of your seam allowance to tie down your threads. And let's just get up here, and I've tipped one seam allowance in one direction and one in the other. I'm sewing a bit slower than you ladies. You're probably much faster than me. So, oops, look at that. That's a bit zigzaggish. So when we get down here to this seam allowance, you can see that this one was tipped in this direction. So I'd like to tip this one in the same direction, and the under one is going to be flipped that other way as well. So I hope you can see that in the video. Again, we're reverse stitching. Making sure that I look at the top of the seam allowance here and the bottom to make sure they're going in the same direction. So then we're going to pull it through, and if you haven't reverse stitched here, it's making the mask fall apart, which we've been seeing that issue as well. But I think that you guys have all heard some of the feedback and that you're improving a lot of your processes as it is now. Now this shows the stitching thread, but we're just going to look past that because this is for purposes of teaching. So you can see when you look at this right here that I've put the seam allowances in opposite directions. One is over here and one is here, and the same at the bottom down here. So we're then told to finger press the top, and I roll it and encourage one side to be the top of it and the other not in the very middle, but I just encourage it toward the inside of the mask a tiny bit more. So finger pressing this, the heat from our hands actually does the trick here. And you have to roll these apart because they should be, the seam allowances should definitely be pulled apart. So then we have this part here where we talk about the 1/2 inch seam allowance for sewing in the elastic. So we feel that you can easily lay your elastic down here. It won't be stitched on. You turn this seam allowance over 1/2 inch and edge stitch, and it has to be reversed. And it has to be 1/2 inch. We've been getting some that are 1/4 inch up at the top here and 1 inch down here, which is not acceptable for what we want. We want a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I can see on my measuring my machine table here. So it's turned in a 1/2 inch and I'm edge stitching it by reverse stitching right here. This way you don't have to thread your elastic through. So that one is all stitched. Now, if I were sewing these for the hospital, I wouldn't want this bunching of threads here. I would like to make sure that my machine is sewing nicely, that we don't have these bunching of threads. And then we come over here and turn this one over 1/2 inch. Finger press it. Lay your elastic down. Making sure not to catch your elastic here. There we go. So now our elastic is ready to be tied, and I always pay special attention to try to keep them flat when you're pulling them through, or when you're tying them. And we don't want any more than a 1 inch tail on the bottom of them. Because that's based on the fit of the mask. So right here we have it like this, and we need to make sure that that's tied tight. Little thread showing up here for me. And I made sure that my sewing area was nice and clean before I started, so that there were no woolies or anything around my machine, because we're sewing a mask for a hospital and we need to keep the most pristine environment that we can to keep the area, to keep the finished product looking good. We've had some issues with animal fur, people hair, threads between 2 layers of fabric, that's not a good thing either. What we need is people to feel the safety and the protection that they need from this mask that we're making, and they'll feel that by seeing the perfect product. So here's my mask. It's got, you can see the thread color because of the difference in color, but I've reverse stitched and it's a finished product. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask me, reach out to me, or have your lead of your hub reach out to me with any questions, and I'm happy to chat anybody through any of the processes. Thanks for listening.